seconds. We're back on the record. It's 1:05 p.m. and this is take 3.
Mr. Gerrity, when we broke for lunch, we were talking about Exhibit 5. Do you still have that in front of you, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
On page 2806, on the lower right-hand corner, we were talking about some of the interchanges between Vice Mayor Sapp and Mr. Hartman. And one of the things that I was curious about, this is again about, I don't know, 12 or 13 lines up from the bottom of the page. There's a sentence that starts, Vice Mayor Sapp inquired if the city was paying them what the system is worth, and then they are going to be able to capture that investment in futures. Mr. Hartman explained that it would be on a capital charge basis and not the income from the customer. And I guess my first question is, do you have any understanding what Mr. Hartman meant when he said a capital charge basis?
I can't speak for Jerry Hartman right now. My own assumptions are what they are, but I don't know what Mr. Hartman was specifically referring to at the time.
Well, and perhaps I phrased my question poorly. You were on the commission at the time, correct? And so you were the recipient of this information at the meeting. And so when Mr. Sapp asked that question and Mr. Hartman's response is that it would be on a capital charge basis, did you have an understanding as to what he was talking about?
If I had to go back, I think that he would be talking about new growth, new hookups versus the existing customer base.
Okay. Does that mean he's referring to impact fees?
I don't know what he's referring to.
Mr. Sapp's question is, will they recapture that or be able to capture that investment in future?
I believe he was referring to the futures payment and being paid with impact fees.
Okay. So that...
Not the existing customers paying for.
Sure. So the exchange there was, we're going to pay these futures and we can recapture them in impact fees, or at least a portion of them?
Yes.
All right. I'll be honest with you, I've looked through these minutes, and that was my impression also, that they were talking about impact fees, but I don't see impact fees mentioned anywhere. Do you know why they wouldn't have mentioned impact fees specifically?
I believe that they're called different things in various parts of the state. Sometimes they're called capacity fees. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're called impact fees. Sometimes they're called hookup charges.
Mm-hmm. Now, hookup charges, sometimes that's also something different, isn't it?
Sometimes.
Yeah. I think even any customer, even without an impact fee, I think, if it's a true oftentimes there's a service charge associated with hooking up the first time. Mm-hmm. Okay. So recognizing that it may be using different phrasing at different times, I don't see any of those being referred to here. There's a reference to futures, and then there's something about a capital charge basis. Do you recall, sitting here today, do you recall any discussion where the word impact fee was actually used during the course of that meeting?
No, I don't recall it being used, or I don't recall it not being used. I have no memory of it.
And would that be true of any of the other, calling for lack of a better term, synonyms for impact fee that you just mentioned?
Well, I know that capacity charge was talked about somewhere at some particular time, and I believe that's what FPU called it, a capacity charge.
Okay. Would you expect that to be reflected in the minutes if that's something that was discussed in the open meeting?
Yeah, I would think so, yes. I don't know if it's in this particular meeting or not.
But you think you did at some point during a public meeting? And we'll go and look at the contract in just a minute. I'm going to represent to you that the contract was actually signed on December 3rd, 2002, which is the same day as this meeting. At the time of this meeting, at the time the city entered into the contract and the city commission authorized the city to enter into the contract, was the city intending to repay the futures with impact fees at that time?
I believe so, partially, yes.
And how...
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please, if you had more to answer. I don't want to cut off your response. And where would that have discussion occurred where the commission determined that it was going to pay part of the futures with impact fees?
I can't recall where that discussion took place. I don't.
Is that the type of thing that you would anticipate seeing in a publicly noticed meeting with recorded minutes, et cetera?
If it was spoke about publicly, yes. I don't remember any discussions, quite frankly, about repaying the futures, much other than we would use impact fees to pay them. Now, I don't remember when those discussions took place, whether it was a private discussion with Mr. Mearns and I, or whether it was at a public meeting. I just can't recall.
You'd agree, wouldn't you, that Mr. Mearns couldn't make the decision independently, and nor could you individually, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
If the city, as a body politic, I guess, is making the decision to utilize impact fees to repay an obligation, that would take something other than just a private conversation with you and Mr. Mearns, correct?
Yes.
And so wouldn't that be something that would require an open meeting for discussion?
I do believe we did pass an impact fee ordinance.
Sure.
And I don't remember when that was, or
Right.
the particulars of that meeting.
And I guess the impact fee ordinance I'll represent to you comes several months later that it's actually passed from the time of the contract. And so I was just trying to figure out if at the time of the contract you recall how it was that you knew the city was going to repay the futures with impact fees.
No, I can't recall how I knew that.
When these types of meetings that you attended, did you ever take personal notes at those?
No, sir. I don't write things down,
As a matter of course?
as a matter of course,
Why is that?
because it becomes public record.
How are these commission meetings recorded? Is there audio, video, anything of that nature?
I think back then it was audio. I don't believe there was any video recordings. I can't recall.
Okay. If you turn over to the next page, it's 2809. And
2809?
yes, sir. There is an interchange with somebody named Miss Corey. Do you know Miss Corey?
I certainly do.
And what is her first name?
Joan?
Joan Corey. Okay. It says Miss Corey inquired if any of this action in terms of purchasing FPU would result in any lower water fees or sewer fees for city residents. City Manager Mearns replied no, but they will not increase. I guess my question is, isn't it a true statement, though, that even if a city resident wanted a new connection, they would have to pay an impact fee ultimately, correct?
That is correct. Well, that is, I guess you could say it's correct.
Sure. I mean,
If someone was building a new home in the city, a current resident,
right.
yes, they would have an additional impact fee.
All right. And the city knew at this time that they were intending to fund the futures with impact fees, correct?
I believe so.
Do you know, and I'll represent you, I don't see it anywhere in the minutes, but do you know whether at any point during the course of this meeting it was disclosed to Ms. Corey in response to her question that impact fees would be a possibility, that would raise the cost?
No, I don't recall that. And quite frankly, I don't recall Ms. Corey speaking at this meeting either.
Okay. But you at least recognize who she is?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And I don't doubt that she did speak. That's not an issue.
And then, at any point, if we go back to the July 2002 meeting, the initial conversation happening at the golf course, and there is the commission special meeting being held there. And if you recall, there was I think a prediction by Vice Mayor Sapp that there would be public opposition to this. Did any of that prediction of opposition enter into the determination as to whether or not impact fees would be talked about in advance of the contract?
No.
Would you agree that if it's not in the minutes here of the publicly held meeting, that there was not a public discussion of impact fees in advance of the entering into the contract with FPU?
If it's not in the minutes, I would agree with you, yes.
Okay. In approving the contract at this 12/3/02 meeting, do you recall whether any changes were made to the purchase and sale agreement, or was it just approved in the form that it was in?
I do not recall.
If there were changes, it would be reflected in the minutes?
Yes, sir.
So, 6, please. Mr. Gerrity, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 6 to your deposition.
Okay.
And specifically,
It says Exhibit 4.
Mine says Exhibit 6.
oh, you know what? I'll tell you what's happened there, Ms. Trudy. These were pre-marked for something else.
Okay.
And so if we would just go with what I announced, because the version that he has actually has the sticker over the sticker.
I got it.
We're being cheap and trying to reuse ones.
No problem.
But thank you for clarifying that, and I apologize. If it happens again, let me
No
know.
problem.
The marked 02847 in the bottom right-hand corner is the signature page.
Yes, I'm actually there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that your signature, Mr. Gerrity?
It certainly is, and it's really one of my better ones.
Well, I was certainly admiring it myself. This indicates I guess my first question, recognizing that it's your signature on there, did you review the contract prior to executing it?
Yes, we reviewed it at a meeting, the meeting on the 3rd.
Okay, so independent of whatever the discussions were at the commission meeting on December 3rd, 2002, did you individually take the draft, read through it?
Yes,
understand what it said?
we were always given a packet prior to a meeting, giving us adequate time to review it.
And so for a December 3rd meeting, when would you have received the contract for review?
Was it a Tuesday?
I think so.
Well, then we would have got it Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
So we had 4 or 5 days to read it over.
That's typical.
Ask questions, schedule a meeting with the city manager or the city attorney to discuss whatever our concerns were.
Okay. In this particular instance, do you know if you scheduled any type of meeting with the city manager or the city attorney to discuss the contract that you were going to be asked to sign?
I do not recall that I did or
Okay.
that I didn't.
So if it happened, you don't recall it.
That's correct.
If you did have such a meeting, would it be recorded or reflected in any kind of writing?
Most likely not, unless it was on the city manager or city attorney's appointment calendar.
Okay.
And I don't know, quite frankly, what kind of calendar they keep or kept.
Sure. But at least in terms of your own personal practice, we would not expect to see a writing associated with that, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. I guess independent of the idea of whether or not you had a meeting with either of them, you also mentioned if you had any questions. Do you recall having questions about the contract?
No, sir.
Could you turn your attention to 2817, please?
Yes, sir.
And I'm looking at section 3A. It says purchase price for clear title. And it says a total cash purchase price in the amount of $18.950 million, $18,950,000. We've already discussed that the additional $7.5 million in futures, that was something that was a certainty, correct? It had to be paid?
Yes.
Knowing that, Do you know why it is that the purchase price is reflected as $18.95 million and not the full purchase price of $26.45 million?
No, sir, I do not.
And going on in that same sentence, it says, as well as a contingent futures consideration as referenced in paragraph C below. I guess my first question is, do you have any understanding of what about the futures consideration was contingent?
I do not.
Because we agree, right, that $7.5 million had to be paid at the end of 7 years, regardless of how much had been paid over the intervening time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you know who prepared the draft contract?
No, I do not.
And I'm assuming, but from your prior answer, to the extent that there were prior versions of drafts of the contract, did you ever see any of those?
I do not recall.
Do you know who would have kept those, if they did exist?
I don't know. No, I do not know.
Did you personally ever meet with any of the reps from Florida Public Utilities as part of the negotiation?
No, I did not.
And when I guess, let me just clarify, does that include telephone conferences? That those did not occur either?
I did not participate in the negotiations in any way.
In any way?
Other than what was said at a public meeting.
Okay. And then speaking about meetings, was there ever, I think you've mentioned the potential for sort of informal oral updates from Mr. Mearns at different points in times. Separate and apart from that, was there ever a meeting in which the contract terms were discussed prior to that 12-302 meeting?
I don't recall.
Okay. If there was such a meeting, would you have expected to be reflected in public records?
Yes, sir.
And then, just for clarity, when did the city decide to enter into this contract?
The night of the meeting,
Okay.
when we voted on it.
Some questions are simpler than others. Can I have Exhibit 7, please? I'm going to show you what's Exhibit 7 to your deposition. First question is if you recognize the document.
Oh, I do now. It's a resolution that was signed and passed and signed on the 3rd of December, 2002.
Okay. If you turn to the second page, marked 331, is that your signature, sir, as Commissioner Mayor?
Yes, sir. Not quite as good as the first one, but it's my signature.
Could you turn back to the first page then?
Certainly.
There's a series of whereas clauses, the last of which says, whereas the Florida Public Utilities has presented a contract for the purchase and sale of the water assets at a sale price of $18,950,000 and other terms and conditions set forth therein. Recognizing now that we've gone through the fact that there was a $26.45 million payment that had to be made to FPU for acquisition of the facility. Does this appear accurate to you to represent the purchase price as $18.95 million?
Let me look at this for a minute. Generally, resolutions are not as specific. It does say in here that other considerations, and that would be found in the contract.
I'm sorry, is that your whole answer?
Pretty much it.
Okay, so, and again, my question was a little more pointed than that. You got $18,950,000 as being represented as the purchase price, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we've agreed, right, that the actual purchase price that needed to be paid was $26.45 million?
Yes, sir.
And so is it your testimony then that the balance of the purchase price is supposed to be communicated through the other terms and conditions component of that sentence?
Well, I would say other terms and conditions, yes, exactly. And it would be found in the contract.
So sitting here today, then, do you consider the sale price of the utility to be $18.950 million?
I consider it to be 18.9 plus $7.5 million in future payments.
Okay. There are a number of things here. If you look under Section 2 at the bottom of this first page, and particularly 2E, it refers to the reasonableness of the purchase contract price and terms. Had the city made a determination as to the reasonableness of the contract purchase price and terms?
I believe we did.
Okay, and where is that determination made?
I think it was made by each individual commissioner.
So you're saying that's just simply bound up in their affirmative vote to enter into the contract?
Yes.
And it talks about the impacts, this is now Section 2F, the impacts of the purchase on utility customers, both positive and negative. Do you have any recollection of what the impacts were that were discussed or considered?
Well, one impact was the stabilization of rates for a period of 5 years. And on the negative side, it might have been the customers that were in the unincorporated area that would receive a 25% upcharge.
Okay. So those are the
As
two.
allowable by state law.
Sure. Were customers outside of the city paying 25% upcharge when FPU owned the utility?
No, they were not.
Okay. So if we go back to what Ms. Corey was asking earlier at the meeting, where she was told there would not be any increase, that's not true for people that are customers of the system but outside the city, correct?
She was a city resident. There were no increases to her, but people outside of the incorporated did experience an increase, yes.
Okay. So to the extent the question was about customers of the system as opposed to Ms. Corey individually, the answer that there'd be no increase was not correct.
The correct answer is there would be no increase to the citizens of Fernandina Beach in their water rates. The people residing outside the incorporated area would receive would be charged 25% upcharge.
Okay. If we go on to the next page, and it's still that same Section 2, sub H is the alternatives to the purchase and the potential impact on utility customers if purchase is not made. Do you have any recollection of what the impact to the utility customers would have been if the purchase was not made?
No, sir, I do not.
And were there any alternatives to the purchase that were discussed?
No, sir, there was not.
Okay, so you'd agree, though, that simply not entering into the contract would have been one of the alternatives?
Certainly.
And was there any discussion or consideration as to whether or not that should have been the outcome?
I don't believe so.
And was there ever any discussion about condemnation as a possible avenue to acquire the system?
I do not recall those discussions if they took place.
You mentioned earlier about different fees that you understood FPU may have charged in connection with new service. Did FPU as a private entity have the right to actually impose an impact fee?
I don't know. That's a legal question. I'm not versed enough to answer that.
Okay, so in terms of your time as a mayor and a commission member, did you ever gain any understanding about what authority you had, or the city of Fernandina Beach had, to impose an impact fee that might be different or unique from other entities?
If those discussions took place, I don't recall them.
Okay. So as you sit here today, you don't know whether or not private entities have the ability to enact an impact fee?
I don't know that.
In terms of a resolution, would you agree one of the purposes for a public resolution like this is to inform your constituents as to what the government is doing?
Sure.
Recognizing that that's one of the reasons for doing that, do you think the citizens of Fernandina Beach might be more fully informed if the purchase price was referenced to include both the $7.5 million that was to be paid later?
One could argue that.
Okay. And if the city already understood that they intended to fund that $7.5 million with impact fees, would it also have better informed the public if it was told to them, this is going to be financed with impact fees?
Sure.
That wasn't done, correct?
No, it was not.
Can I have 8, please? Recognize this document, sir?
Yes, it's an ordinance.
Okay. And how would you rate your signature on page 2082?
Pretty good. I
Okay.
must have been the first one I signed that day.
So we agree that this is something you signed as Commissioner Mayor?
Yes.
What is the purpose of this ordinance?
It's to establish a water capacity fee and trust fund.
Okay. Tell me about the, first off, water capacity fee. Is that the same as an impact fee?
I would say so, yes.
All right. Look at the various. Let's go back to then 2082 indicates this was passed on 18 March 2003.
Yes.
Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes.
As I look below, there's an attestation by Cassandra Mitchell. And there's a number of notices there. It says a date of first reading, March 6, 2003, date of publication, March 7, 2003. Is that common for the date of publication to be after the first reading?
Yes.
Okay. So is that the normal course for how things are?
Yes.
Okay. And this being an ordinance, the time from the first reading to final passage is 12 days, correct?
Yes.
Is that a common time frame?
You can have to have, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it
Sure.
has to be, the time you can pass it is contingent on when it's advertised.
All right.
And I'm not sure what that timing is.
So whenever this thing could be passed, the critical date then would have been that date of publication on March 7?
Yes.
And again, just in your experience as a commissioner, and I guess also as a city manager, this is something that would come across your radar screen from time to time. Do you have any sense of what the typical time frame in Fernandina Beach is from time of publication to time of final passage?
It has to be 10 days.
Okay.
I believe that's the magic time.
So that's the statutory minimum?
I believe so.
But in recognizing that for legal compliance, it has to be that, is that also still a typical time frame, or is it typically long?
Sometimes it's a little longer.
If we go back to the first page then of Exhibit 8, has 2079. I want to direct your attention, this is Section 2-540, Findings in Support of Water Capacity Fees. Number 2 says that Hartman and Associates, Inc. have prepared several reports detailing required improvements and expenditures which will be required for the water system. Now, do you know what required improvements they're talking about?
Well, you'd have to go and review Mr. Hartman's report. Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Well, let me come at this a little bit differently. This is creating impact fees, right? These impact fees were used exclusively for repayment of FPU debt under the futures component of the transaction, correct? So recognizing that the impact fees were used exclusively to repay the debt, is it a correct statement that none of the impact fees went to pay for, quote, required improvements and expenditures?
You can't use impact fees for required improvements or maintenance issues.
Okay. So to the extent that this is implying that impact fees are being used for required improvements, that would be inaccurate?
I don't think that's an implication at all. I guess it depends on how you read it.
Well, let's read it then together. Section 2-540, and it says, findings in support of water capacity fees, definitions. And under A, it says, in support of the water capacity fee, the city...
Excuse me, where are you?
2079, 2540, sub
Okay,
A.
I'm with you. Okay.
In support of the water capacity fee, the city commission makes the following findings. Now, you were a member of the commission at this time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you signed this document.
Yes, sir, I did.
And so it says here that Hartman & Associates, Inc. have prepared several reports detailing required improvements and expenditures which will be required for the water system.
Okay.
Correct? And my question is, if you disagree that this is suggesting that impact fees are going to be required for required improvements, what is it supposed to be suggesting?
Let me read it.
Please do.
Okay, would you repeat your question?
Madam Court Reporter, if you'd read it back.
From the gist, are you, oh, I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that impact fees are an important report for what? I'm sorry.
Tell you what, I'll take another shot at it. Why don't you cue back up to where we are?
Okay, I'm sorry. Drink.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
You ready? Okay, Mr. Gerrity, we're talking about Exhibit 8 here.
Right.
Ordinance number 2003-06, signed by you, correct?
Yes,
Mayor Commissioner. And specifically, I'm talking about Section 2-540, where it talks about the findings in support of the water capacity fee. And sub 2, A2, makes reference to that reports detailing required improvements and expenditures which will be required for the water system.
Okay.
Would you agree that that suggests that there's things that are required for the water system?
Yes, I would.
Okay, and it talks about required improvements? That's what it's communicating, correct?
Yes.
And I think you also agree that the impact fees are not going to be used to actually construct required improvements, correct?
I think it's at the city's discretion what they want to use those impact fees for. I think that we have used them to pay for the futures payment.
Okay, when you say it's at the city's discretion, they simply can't pass
Well,
an
you
impact
just
fee that
can't-
says, please
no.
let me finish my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
You certainly can't pass an impact fee that says we're going to charge an impact fee and do whatever we want with it, correct?
You're exactly right. An impact fee has to benefit growth and the people that have paid it.
Sure, and this ordinance is actually the legal mechanism by which you are saying we're going to pass an impact fee and here's why.
Correct.
And when we're saying here's why, what was referenced in the ordinance is reports about required improvements and expenditures which will be required for the water system, correct? That's what the city was representing through this ordinance, correct? And is it a true statement, though, that all of the impact fees went to pay debt that was committed to pay FPU, that the city committed to pay FPU pursuant to the futures component of the purchase price?
Sure, and that's expenditures which will be required for the water system.
Okay.
That's required.
And it says expenditures which will be required for the water system is done in conjunction, in that same sentence, it talks about required improvements, correct? Would you agree that someone reading this sentence might very well conclude that this is, that the...
Object to the form of the question.
Well, let me finish before you object to it, because it could get better along the way.
It could, I'm not optimistic.
Good enough. But I'm just trying to get what you think this means here when we're talking about Section 2-540A2. And so, do you agree that someone reading this might conclude, reasonably, that one of the reasons that you have to have water capacity fees is to pay for required improvements to the system?
I'm going to object to the form of the question.
And expenditures which will be required by the system, yes.
Okay. But again, and my question is just a little bit more narrow. Could one reasonably conclude that one of the things that the capacity fees are needed for is to pay for required improvements to the system?
One can reasonably draw any conclusion they want to. I have to take it literally for what it says because I can't remember 11 years ago.
Okay. So we'd agree, though, literally what it says is that the fees are going to be used for required improvements. That's one of the things it says it's going to be used for, correct?
Required improvements and expenditures.
Okay. So there's two things it's talking about, required improvements and expenditures, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so we'd agree required improvements is one of the things that this ordinance says that the capacity fees are going to be used for, correct?
Well, it says that they have prepared several reports detailing required improvements and expenditures.
Okay. And that's one of the findings that the city is making in support of the water capacity fee, correct?
Yes.
I mean, that's what it
Yes.
says, correct?
Yes, sir.
You signed it, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the conclusion there in 4 is it is appropriate to have new customers connecting to the system pay an appropriate water capacity fee, correct?
Yes.
Under sub B, it says water capacity fee is defined as the cost of the capacity per ERU. Do you understand what that means? What does it mean?
The cost it provides, what it costs us to provide service to the equivalent residential unit, which is one household.
And so that's how the water capacity fee was defined and
That's how
calculated?
it was calculated.
Calculated, okay. And who did that calculation?
I believe it was Mr. Hartman.
All right. And I think we've talked about a calculation, we've talked about a methodology, but you've agreed with me that to the extent an impact fee study was ever done, that's not something you saw.
I'm not sure if he did a study or if he didn't.
Okay. You have no recollection of ever seeing one?
No, I did not.
And you certainly didn't review one in anticipation or in preparation for your deposition,
No,
correct?
I did not.
So existing customers, the cost to provide them the service didn't change when the system went from FPU ownership to city ownership, correct?
That's correct.
And so a new customer...
Existing city resident customers.
Sure, and I apologize, I didn't mean to make that distinction, but you're correct. So if we're just talking about a City of Fernandina Beach resident, that the cost of providing them that system, or that water service and the capacity didn't change from the day that FPU owned the system to when City of Fernandina Beach owned the system.
That's correct.
Can I ask you to turn your attention to 2081, the subsequent page there?
Certainly.
And specifically, I want to ask you about Section 2-544, creation of the Water System Capacity Trust Fund. What is the trust fund?
It's a separate line item in our accounting system that those fees are accounted for.
Okay. Would it be accurate, though, that all of the monies collected for impact fees still were simply deposited in a general operating account for the city of Fernandina Beach?
Well, not in the general operating account. And if they were put in the same bank account, is that what you're asking? That's true.
Correct.
However, they're accounted for in a different way. They're accounted as a trust fund line item on the accounting ledger.
So in terms of to the extent a trust fund existed, it was simply in the way that the city of Fernandina accounted for the money. It was not a separate account, like a literally separate bank account.
Nobody does business like that.
I understand that, but I'm asking you just simply, is that an accurate statement as to Fernandina?
That is an accurate statement, yes.
Okay. When you say nobody does business like that, are you referring to governments generally, or? I mean, I would just simply say, as an attorney, when I say I've got something in my trust account,
Of course.
I've got a separate account.
I understand that.
So some people do business that way.
Governments don't generally do business that way.
Okay, and so you're referring to how governments, when they say there's a trust fund, they're really just saying, I've got a separate line item.
I've got a separate line item. That money is sorted out on that line item.
Okay.
And accounted for in that regard.
That same section, 2-544, down at sub C, it talks about the use of the funds to be exclusively for purpose of payment of city indebtedness. But then it also says at the end, or such other purposes and uses as may be allowed under the Utility Acquisition and Improvement Revenue Bond Series 2003. And my question, sir, is are you aware of any other uses for those funds that were allowable under the bonds?
No, sir, I'm not.
This portion of city code that we've just been talking about in Exhibit 8, is that still on the books in Fernandina?
I can't tell you if it's in this form or not.
Okay.
We still do have a water impact fee.
I still have water impact fee. Okay. And the original water impact fee, at least according to this, was used exclusively to repay the indebtedness to FPU, unless otherwise permitted under the bonds. That indebtedness to FPU has been paid, correct?
Yes, it has.
So would it be fair to say that if there's still an impact fee on the books, is it for a different purpose today?
It's probably to continue to pay that futures payment that we bonded. I don't know if it's a bond or a bank loan, to tell you the truth.
So you may still be paying off debt associated with the acquisition?
Yes, the futures payment debt, yes.
Okay. But in terms of FPU, they've been paid in full?
Yes, they have.
Can I have 9, please? Thanks. Just ask you to take a review of that. Can you also give me 11?
Okay.
Thank you.